Welcome to the Wellbeing Forum, Growing Up in a Connected World. We've got three amazing speakers today, four, including myself. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce you to each one of them, and then I'm going to allow them to take the stage and introduce their topics to you. Allow me to introduce the three guys here. The first one who's going to be joining us today is David Wright. He's the Director, UK Safer Internet Centre. He works at the National Awareness Centre and part of the European InSafe network. He's worked extensively in online safety for many years with children, schools, and wider agencies. He advises on a number of government and school inspectorates on online safety strategy and policy, particularly with regard to schools and curriculum. David has recently been appointed as an expert advisor to the UNITU. So please join me in welcoming David Wright.
Thank you very much. If we can just click on to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So it's my pleasure to kick off this particular panel around well-being. And you know, well-being is such an important subject, and as we've kind of just seen up here, you know, the new online safety is one of the things that we refer to it. So I'm David Wright. I'm Director of the UK Safe Internet Centre at SWGfL, and in that context, we are with the National Online Safety Centre. We're one of 32 European Safe Internet Centres across Europe. We have a number of obligations, actually a partnership with 3 charities. We're responsible for managing illegal child abuse content online. We operate a helpline who supports you, the children's workforce, around online safety issues. But our primary role is one of awareness raising to do with this particular subject. And so, like I say, that's what I lead from a SWGfL perspective. Another example of that awareness-raising work is Safer Internet Day. Can I have a show of hands? How many of you are aware of Safer Internet Day? Fantastic, look at that. For those who you aren't, it's on the February the 11th, so we are just merely a few days away from the next Safer Internet Day, so please do go and check it out. saferinternet.org.uk is how you'll find information about that. So on to well-being. We've seen a lot of headlines around this particular subject recently. I'm sure you'll agree. We've seen some tragedy kind of connected with this as well. The government very much are looking at this. So we've seen in April last year we saw the publication of what is the Online Harms White Paper. So it's signalling the intention to introduce a regulator in this particular space as well as a regulatory framework, as well as what it's talked about, introducing a statutory duty of care particularly on social media providers. But in actual fact, that duty of care is what all of you have lived with as teachers, as those working with children have had for some 15, 16 years. But like I say, lots and lots of headlines. And around well-being, we always kind of cite some particular research. So one of the ones I'm going to just kind of highlight, looking at well-being, particularly from a technology perspective, is one that the Royal Society for Public Health published called Status of Mind. And it looked at the impact on particular aspects of teenage mental health from our most popular social media services, as well as online services. So, for example, it concluded that YouTube, whilst it has a big impact on sleep, actually has lots of positive contributions around expression, contribution, collaboration, that sort of thing. Then it was Twitter, then Facebook, then Snapchat, and finally Instagram that concluded had the most negative in these 5 different platforms, most negative impact for a whole host of reasons, not just one of sleep, also bullying, body image, and then finally FOMO, this fear of missing out, this term that's been appended, the fear of missing out. When you send a message, there's an expectation that you get an instant response, irrespective of the time of day or night. Indeed, there's an expectation that I will reply. This fear of missing out, which the researchers at the Royal Society very clearly kind of highlighted that was the case. So in terms of technologies and the impacts, Professor Andy Phippen, we've undertaken a number of series of research with Andy over the years. Most recently, we produced some research around screen time and about well-being. And one of the things he concluded is that there are clear correlations between screen time and online abuse. So there are clear correlations in that particular case. We saw in February last year, and this is for the parents particularly amongst you, we saw in February the 4 chief medical officers in the UK publish advice for parents managing screen times. And they concluded 4 things. Firstly, that parents should be taking a precautionary approach. There's insufficient evidence currently to determine whether screen-based activities have a positive or a negative impact. And so parents should be taking this precautionary approach. Secondly, and we really like this one, that families should be having screen-free mealtimes. Screen-free mealtimes are a way of managing the challenge of screens. Now, I suspect in that particular case, the challenge is actually not for the children, but for potentially the parents. Yes, you know who you are. And then the third one was that there should be no screens an hour before bedtime. It was something the Royal College of Paediatricians concluded in November 2018, but they went a stage further, so there should be no screens in the bedroom overnight. And then finally, we should be taking a break from screens at least every 2 hours. So these 4 things that the chief medical officers advise parents and families in this challenge of managing screen time. And you kind of ask this question, why? Why are we all so compelled to that device in your pocket right now? And again, a lot of work has gone on to this over the recent 2 years. We've been looking at this kind of persuasive design. And I ask you to kind of couch this, 2 questions. I want you to think about these 2 questions in terms of your use of the device in your pocket. When you woke up this morning, so you think back to this morning, when you woke up, what was the first thing that you did? Now, for many of us, 86% of us, Ofcom conclude sleep within a metre of our mobile phone. It was probably to reach across to turn off your very expensive alarm clock, and then to check messages, whether that's news or email or social media, some form of feed. That was possibly the first thing that you did. And then the second question is, when was the last time you checked your phone? Now, it's reputed that children check their phones 150 times a day. Now, we might think that's a lot. We might think that's not a lot. It's this question, why? Why do we have this compulsion? That device in your pocket that has been buzzing whilst I've started talking already. And so it's by no accident, folks, by no accident at all. That device in your pocket, the services you use, are inherently designed to intrude, to monopolize your time. And it does that through a whole range of different things. So, for example, the action of refresh. You take that action of refresh has been likened to gambling. So if you go to a slot machine, you pull the handle down, you let go, and the wheel starts spinning. And you wait with this anticipation about, what are we going to win? Are we going to win something? You go to your inbox or your newsfeed, you pull it down, you let go, and the wheel starts spinning. We're waiting for that new email. You might have only checked it like 3 seconds earlier, but we're waiting for something new. We can see the similarities. Again, these are by no accident at all. Another example, I'm not going to, time precludes me to go into snap streaks, which is a great example of persuasive design. One of the things that I did want to raise, and this is really small as well, but a really obvious use of persuasive design. You've just sent a message on your phone. It appears in the bottom right corner with the words delivered. Then 3 little dots appear in the bottom left-hand side. Someone's replying to me. So what do? We wait. The purpose of the 3 little dots is to stop you going off and doing something else. So we kind of ask this question then around the impact. So from your perspective, you may be able to appreciate that. And so from a classroom perspective, from a child's perspective, we may not necessarily be able to realize who's in control of who here, which is kind of the question that you ask. Are you master of your phone, or is your phone master of you? Who's kind of in charge? And so, like I say, this is where we get the intrusion into what is family life, particularly as well, I'm sure, in the classroom as well, the intrusion that we get through devices within the classroom as well. So how well equipped are schools generally around the subject of online safety? So every year we publish a report. Again, Professor Andy Phippen publishes a report for us, an annual assessment of school policy and practice when it comes to online safety. We're about to publish the one for 2019. Now, this is based on something called 360 Degree Safe. 360safe.org.uk is a self-review tool that schools are invited to use. It's used by some 14,500 schools across the country to enable you to assess where you are in particular aspects through your policy, through education, through infrastructure, a whole series of different aspects around online safety provision. And so when you rate yourselves in each particular case, it helps you then progress forwards. For us, it discloses where schools are strong and where they're weak. So we know that they have a strength around policy and around filtering, but we have a weakness around staff training. Actually, the data suggests that more schools in the UK spend more time training parents than they do their own staff. So there's lots and lots of questions there as well, I think. So the ability to manage mobile devices from a well-being perspective is very much clearly one of those. And I'm just going to finish off just by closing around the opportunity that falls upon us just in a few days' time. I mentioned Safer Internet Day, which those of you hopefully will have remembered already, is on the 11th of February in just, 2 weeks on Tuesday, just a few days' time. It is an ideal opportunity to talk about these subjects, to talk about these particular issues, both with children, but also your wider communities, with parents, with your colleagues. So we have already published education packs, conversation starters, as well as Safer Internet Day TV content. So again, saferinternet.org.uk is how you will find all that particular content, and do go and mark something. And as well at that address, you'll be able to register as a supporter, to mark the things that you're doing amongst the other thousands and thousands of organisations up and down the country that will be doing something to mark Safer Internet Day this year, forgive me, just like I say, in just a few weeks' time. It is a hugely important subject that we are all facing kind of here, particularly to do with the health and the well-being of all our children. Safer Internet Day, February the 11th. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, David. The next talk is co-presented between myself and Dominic Norwich. So I'm just going to introduce Dominic, and halfway through my talk, I will stop and hand it over to him. Dominic Norwich is an experienced teacher, school leader, and educational researcher with a career spanning the private and public sectors, having taught a range of subjects from Key Stage 2 to 5. He has worked at United Learning, a group of over 80 English academies and independent schools, for the past 6 years, and in 2019 became its Chief Operating Officer. Prior to this, Dominic spent 5 years working as an ICT consultant for Bett and various academy and BSF projects nationally, supporting schools from Cumbria to the Isles of Sicily. His master's degree in education focused on school leadership with a research-based thesis examining the impact of ICT on pupil motivation. Our talk is on digital well-being, understanding technology's effect on mental health and pupils' views on technology. So like I said, I'll just put this down. I will start off a presentation, and then Dominic will come halfway in between. Okay. So our work is on digital well-being, on the concept of digital well-being. And when we embarked upon this theory of well-being, we found we were posing ourselves with a lot of questions. We know we're growing up in a highly rich, connected world. We know that our children have access to an abundant amount of technology, to smartphones, TVs, interactive screens, electronic toys. These are their toys, and they can easily preoccupy themselves with it. In fact, we've had such great opportunities. They have access to Amazon, to podcasts at any time. We've got online deliveries as we see fit and when it suits us. So our digital world is here to stay. And it has served us in a very positive manner, making our life easier. However, when you see negative headlines such as social media causes depression, or obesity in children and technology, or social media using disrupting teen sleep and exercise, or England schools worse for cyberbullying, then you think, are we really using the technology in a good way? Could it possibly be vindictive in nature? And is it actually leading our new generation into a downward spiraling curve? So these are questions we ask ourselves. We know on one hand, it's really great. It's got fantastic benefits. And I couldn't live without my technology because it streamlines so many things that I need to do. But on the other hand, we have all these negative approaches to it. We have online harm issues. We've got concerns. So is this only a taste of our future? And are we happy with it? And is it a good one? We don't really know. And that's what we came down to. We don't know. What is the truth? On one hand, in 2016, we found that Common Sense Media surveyed a number of teens. And then they found that these children were actually, rather they described themselves to be addicted to their phones. And they felt distressed without it. So that's kind of what the findings showed in that research. But then very recently, in 2019, we have a professor who's published this article in journal PNAS, and he found that the effects of social media use on teenage life satisfaction is probably tiny. And that the biggest indicator is that family, friends, and school life satisfaction has a greater impact on well-being. So he's asked us, or rather what this research shows, is that perhaps we should shift our focus, not completely off technology, because it is an enabler, it's still there, it's the catalyst, but maybe we should now start focusing on our well-being. Look at what is it that's making an impact on our well-being itself, from what we call the emergence of the online and offline world. What is it that is coming out of all of this? And that then brought us to this question. Can our children continue to use the technology they love in a safe environment in which they can flourish and capitalize on the benefits of the digital age? So with this in mind, we started the research. We're in the process of writing a book on digital well-being. What we decided to do is look at the research behind it, look at the evidence, look at the findings. But at the same time, let's find out what are the children really saying. So we see it from our angle, from our viewpoint. And it could be that's because we've grown up in a different world. We never had access to this type of technology. We have our own ideas, our beliefs, our morals, our traditions. But what about them? They're growing up in a completely different environment. To them, it's really normal. Should we not be asking them what they think? So having looked at that, looking at the mental health, I found out we can break it down into three main sectors. One being emotional, physical, second physical, and the third one social. Now, from a mental health point of view, it's all about how our technology serves us and how we can move ahead with it rather than getting disrupted, interrupted, or the technology itself getting in the way. So two things came out of this from the emergence of online and offline world. One was resilience, and the other was digital distraction. We need to be in a position where our children are resilient. So we all know about the online harms such as cyberbullying and grooming and sexting. Now, as you all know, cyberbullying it starts perhaps in a environment, possibly school. It'll follow the child into the classroom, out of the classroom, into their home environment, and literally take over their life. It's a 24/7 spiral downward curve. So we should be in a position where our children, or at least we'd like to think, are resilient enough to work with these situations or deal with it and cope with it and react to it in a positive manner. So these are the questions we're asking. Do our children have this resilience that's required in mental health? There are two parts of mental health: being positive, being proactive, being happy with life. And then there is adapting to change and being resilient. Are our children resilient enough in the online world to cope with the changes that are taking place if it's in a negative manner? The other thing we found was distraction, digital distraction. We get so caught up in our lives and looking at those beeping, flashing lights, or the fact that it's vibrating in your pocket, or you know what, something's happened, I need to check into it because I need to write this message right now. And what I often tell my children is, if it's not a matter of life and death, it's not really urgent. However, there's this whole concept of digital distraction and the sort of stress and anxiety it's putting onto an individual. So from a mental health, emotional well-being point of view, how are we dealing with it? We think it's an issue. That's what research shows. Is that what the children think? In the same way, there's physical appearances and body image. Again, research shows that young people are spending less time outside and more time with digital devices indoors, possibly contributing to child obesity and health problems. Now, it's really convenient to blame technology for the overuse of increased levels or decreased levels of physical activity. But with new technologies coming into being, such as mobile tech, where you're constantly moving around, or PlayStations or Xboxes, it makes you wonder and think, are we not getting them to move a little bit more? It's easy to blame the technology, but new research has shown that it's not necessarily conclusive that children who are gaining weight, it might be that these children, or a majority of children, have already established themselves in patterns and behaviors that are quite sedentary. And so it's maybe something we need to work on more rather than blame it on the tech. Who knows? Let's ask the children. And then there's the body image, which is our famous selfie. We all love selfies. And how many selfies have you done at Bett so far? We like to get the likeness, the comments, the hearts. It's a new trend, and our children love it. But with that comes obsessiveness. With that comes what we call gratification. And again, there's some research to show that this can become quite stressful for a child. If they don't get their comments, they don't get their likes, and they don't even get told how great they look, or the whole filter me beautiful aspect using all these filters available, then they're not going to fit in. So there is that too with it, from a body image point of view. And lastly, social integration identity. In this concept, lifestyles, interests, values, traditions, beliefs are really all important to social well-being and the quality of life that we have. Often we might tell our children or the young teens, turn your phone off. Stop getting on the phone so much. Okay, you already said enough you have to say, let it go. But to them, it's not a disconnected world. Their online and offline personalities are becoming one and the same. It's absurd to say it's time to turn off the phone to some of them. We don't disconnect, do we? We just keep it away. So while that's really great and they get involved in all of it, what tends to happen is that sometimes you find, or at least the research shows, that they're staying on their social media platforms in the interest of contributing to comments and text messages for a long period of time. And research has shown that social networking sites can help alleviate loneliness, so you'll find some of them using it to alleviate loneliness, but those who have turned to social media can get wrapped up in mindless scrolling of news feeds and interests and photos of friends. And we do the same. We can get totally wrapped up in it. And the good thing is, it's actually good for us, is it was totally intentional. So a developer from Facebook basically said it's called the infinite scroll syndrome. Very intentional, and it was there so that we could use it for a long period of time. And the reason we get so absorbed in it is because we don't allow our brains to get caught up with what we're doing. So we continuously to scroll. Now, unless, of course, you need to get to work or catch the bus or get on the tube or you have something to get to, we can get quite easily lost in our mindless scrolling. Now, as adults who have responsibilities, we have places to go, things to do. Young children can get easily caught up and sit for hours scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and it's not their fault. It was purely habitual. It was absolutely designed for this. So with all of that comes also the fear of missing out. Now, I don't have to say much because our previous speaker, David's already mentioned it, but FOMO is a big thing. Whereas we think it's distraction, it's all-consuming, it's interruption, to young children and the younger generation, it's connection, it's transparency, and it's real-time information. And what's the problem? There's nothing wrong with it. It's how our world works. So with all these three different sectors and the questions that have come out for it, we decided, like I said, to throw a survey out to our students. We introduced it to over 5,000 students, and we've got some findings that have come back to us. Now, Dominic Norwich will take us through the findings and some more correlations with what we've done with it. Let me just hand over.
Thank you. Thanks, Neelam. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me.
as Neelam's explained, her school is part of United Learning. We're a group of 85 schools around England. And for the last 3 years, we've been conducting a survey of what pupils feel and think about their experience at school, because we want to understand that better so that we can improve. And we've been using a company called Jurio to help us do that. And I say that not just because one of its founders is in the front row, but also because it's probably one of the most impactful things I've seen done with educational technology in my 20-plus year career in this sector. It's given us an insight into things that we never suspected before. We survey all children between years 2 and 10, and this year that amounted to something like 35,000 students. And we introduced a new module this year around digital well-being. So 8,000 of those secondary-age students started answering questions like this one, which told us some fairly unsurprising things, that most children have access to a device. And equally, another unsurprising thing emerged, that none of them really think that they overuse that device. It should, furthermore, come as zero surprise that most of them don't use that device for homework either, and actually most of what they perceive that they're using their access to digital tools for is consuming social media. But digging beneath that surface, we asked a few slightly more telling questions, which we were hoping to learn how we could adapt from. So the answer to this question worries me a little bit, in that over a quarter of the children between the years 7 and 10 within our 85 schools think they've actually got a problem switching off from their digital device. They don't think they could really do without it. That is problematic in itself. We suspected that, or we think as adults, that children will perceive a difference between how they present themselves in real life and how they do it digitally. They don't really agree, actually. That appears to be a bit of an adult construct, or maybe just the way that we use technology. Obviously, we're very keen to understand if children feel equipped to deal with the challenges that online experiences present, particularly cyberbullying, grooming, those kind of things. And the data suggested, happily, that most children feel they've either not encountered problems or they can in some way resolve those problems. But a worrying 5% of children, so that's 1 or 2 children in every class, actually do encounter problems and can't do anything about it. And we're really keen to understand who those children are and why, which I'll tell you about the next stage of our work in a second. And the final thing we asked them about was how social media makes them feel about their own body image. And we suspected that this relationship would be quite complex, and it was. It gets a bit better as children get older, but it's generally stable. But it is massively gendered. Girls feel twice as negative about themselves and their use of social media than boys do. Perhaps that is a truism that we were expecting, but really hard numbers. 1 in 3 girls in our schools has a negative body image because of what they see online. So taking those kind of top-level questions, we decided, can we compare that to things that we already know about the children that might teach us something else? So we decided to run some correlations. So firstly, we took all of the children who said that they could do without their device and correlated that with all of the other questions in our wider survey, which covers multiple topics. And we found something quite interesting in that, again, a bit of a truism, and I'm not sure which way causality flows here, but there was a moderate but significant correlation between children who can easily do without their device and children who have the skills that we know they need in order to succeed in school. And the first of those skills is resilience. So they can keep going in the face of adversity. And the second thing children who think they can do without their device are good at is reading. They do a lot of it, and they like it. Maybe these things shouldn't surprise us, but these are quite powerful, and it raises the hypothesis for us, if these children who can go without the device are good at these things, how can we support those children who feel that they have some level of compulsion to use their device every day to be better at these things? Another question we ask in the survey is about their aspiration. And where a child has a digital device, access to one, they strongly aspire to do well at GCSEs, but this falls off rapidly. So that small percentage of children who don't have access to a digital device don't actually think that doing well at GCSEs is that important. Now, this may just be a proxy for income and family poverty. It might be that the poorest families who don't have access to devices also have low aspiration, or there may be something more complex going on there which we need to dig into. And finally, we looked at prior attainment. So children who'd done well at Key Stage 2, how did that interact with these questions about digital well-being? And the first thing we found is that we couldn't explain the differences in how online images affect people and their prior attainment. So children of all abilities are equally affected by what they see online in terms of body image. And secondly, again, maybe this may be just a kind of department of the obvious statement, but children who have done well at Key Stage 2, so higher attaining children, are much more likely to be able to cope online with the challenges they face. And then the interesting part of that is children of low attainment are very much at risk in this environment. Are we doing enough as schools to support them? So our next steps for this, I mean, that's all kind of quite high level, doesn't really prove anything, and I know this is the Bett show and you can make assertions about impact that maybe don't stack up, but I'll avoid those. Our next step is to use these as a jumping off point. There are hypotheses. We're now, Neelam and I and other colleagues are going to go into the schools and talk to some of the children with the characteristics that have interested us from this analysis and really try and understand in a more nuanced way why they feel these ways. And those findings are going to be written up in a book that Neelam's writing later this year. And we hope to really shed some light on what this current population of children thinks about growing up in a digital world. Thank you very much. I will now pass over.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominic. Okay, our final speaker today is Steve Buns, who is an experienced teacher, researcher, and author. He's taught in primary and secondary schools and has covered many roles, including head of computing and senior leader. For the Open University, he advised schools on their use of technology. He currently works with schools as a professional learning specialist for XMA, focusing on coaching. He's researching about sleep and creating resources for schools. Through podcasts, talks, and lessons, he aims to address the sleeping elephant in the room. Please welcome me in introducing Steve Bunce for his talk.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Did you sleep well? Yeah? Tell the person next to you, did you sleep well? If you didn't if there's not somebody near you, think about today, did somebody ask you, did you sleep well? Or did you maybe even volunteer that? You saw somebody said, oh, I had a terrible night's sleep. Okay? It's something interesting. We're sometimes quite keen to share that with others, how we are, and did you sleep well? And that's an interesting question. And so is this, how do you sleep at night? And I suppose that depends how you emphasize that, whether you're asking that to a friend, how did you sleep at night? Or whether you're asking the Prime Minister, maybe, how do you sleep at night? It's a different way of emphasizing it. But thinking about it, there's a lot to do with sleep. We all understand we need sleep. That's we know it's a given. And yet, this is just in the news yesterday from the BBC. 1 in 4 children has too little sleep. So what is too little sleep? How do our children know if they're getting enough sleep? How do the parents know? How do the carers know if their children are getting too little sleep? Is it their opinion, or is it factually based on what they actually need as an individual? So we've got lots of headlines going around. So then you think, well, where do we do this? What do we do in school about sleep? And how do we link back to what we've been hearing about this evening about digital well-being? How do maybe the digital devices affect us? Or maybe even how can the digital devices help us in that? So, for example, you can listen to podcasts, David Baddiel, with the amusing pun of sleeping with David Baddiel. He talks about his own insomnia and how he finds that he needs maybe some more specialist guidance. And if you listen to the podcast, it tells you more and more what he's trying to do. And that can be a range of different approaches. And the more and more I've been researching into sleep and researching into education, it's been something of a passion of mine for many years now, is often it's very, very personal. And sometimes a lot of the advice and things we see there is very, very individual to that person. So this led on to sort of a challenge. So really, if over here we've got the latest sleep research and the universities and all the different sleep researchers finding out what's really good for us or what we actually need, and yet over here we have maybe the schools and families and parents and carers looking after children, and they need to have that latest research, but in a manageable way that they can action it. How can someone or something be the bridge between those two? So again, if you look into different people who are talking, this gentleman here, Dr. Neil Stanley, he's often on the television when they do ask to speak to a sleep expert. One of the things he often says is, the longer or more interesting the name somebody gives themselves, like sleep guru or something like that, then he reckons that is inversely proportional to how good they are. So he often offers advice about what he thinks is good sleep, and he's fairly indifferent on digital devices. So things like, for example, you could argue, well, if the children are up late watching their phones and that's going to reduce their amount of sleep, is that terrible for them? Or again, will they catch up on sleep elsewhere? What does the research say? And then people say, oh, should we get a sleep tracker? Will a sleep tracker help me get better sleep? And maybe it's not. Maybe it will make you worry more about your sleep because you've been tracking your sleep. It tells you you've had a bad night's sleep, and therefore you stay awake more worrying about your sleep. Nick Littlehales is a gentleman who was formerly in charge of a very large bed company and a part of a network of companies who worked in the bed company. And he approached Alex Ferguson and asked him about Manchester United and how they actually sleep and how does the team prepare for a game, what do they do? It turns out nothing. So, for example, all these expensive footballers would really focus on their diet, they'd focus on their time training, and then if they were playing a game away and overseas, they'd sleep in whichever hotel, in whichever beds. And so he then became more of a sleep coach for people. He took it from looking at those, like we talk often, marginal gains. What can we do to help you have a better night's sleep in there? And he helped the football teams. He's since helped the British cycling team and others. And he basically has come down to some very practical advice which he thinks will help you get better sleep and will help you guide others to do that. But again, that may not be the latest research, and also other researchers disagree with that. But at least I thought, with this as advice, it's actionable. It's something you could say to people, you could do something today, you could go and talk to your children, your classes, your students about how to do this. So for example, as I mentioned at university, for example at Oxford University, they have their sleep department. They've developed things like an app called Sleepio, and they have advice going for that, and they will analyze people's sleep and look into that. And there's lots of different conditions that could happen. But one of the biggest ones that comes across with all the different things I read and research is about, for example, sleep apnea, where people are stopping breathing in the night. Now, you might snore, or you may know somebody who does snore. And again, this could just be, a slight blockage of the airways. But it can be really linked to, for example, really bad blockage of the airways can lead to heart disease, it can lead to other conditions, it can lead to your body not repairing itself properly. And as we've heard this evening from Neelam about sort of the idea of the students and the children with their body image, if they're tired and they're not coping well with things, then that's going to affect their mood too. We've also heard from David talking about the fear of missing out, or maybe the thing where you wake up, the first thing you do is you grab your phone and you read that message, you read that email. And again, with less sleep, will you manage to deal with that better? You imagine you're going for a run and you don't warm up, you just go straight for a run. It's not as good as if you were to warm up, prepare, and get ready for a run and do that. Same with sleep. So how are we going to try and get all this latest information, bridge that down to being actionable and useful for schools and parents? So for example, your circadian rhythm is the clock inside your body. What time is it now? Think in your head, what time is it of the day? Have a look at your watch. Are you right? Are you close to what it is? Are you already looking at your watch going, well, he's going on a bit. Okay, I'm nearly done. But what it is your internal body clock lets you know what time of day it is. And it's about 24 hours. So again, circadian, and dayum for day, it's about a day. But what resets that clock and gets it really perfect is, for example, if you see daylight. Now, of course, in the Bett show here, that's terrible for daylight. But when you get daylight, then it resets your clock. It tells you what time of day it is and helps you to do that. With circadian rhythms too, things like anchoring your wake-up time. So at the weekend, maybe tomorrow, are you going to sleep in if you get the opportunity? But is that good for you? Should you really just keep the same waking up time as well? So for example, chatting to a head teacher of a primary school in Scotland, he has his breakfast club because he knows if he can get those children in through the door that morning, he's got them for the day and they can do loads of things because their parents have no routine. In fact, sometimes the children are getting themselves up out of bed and having to get themselves dressed and get to school. They have no rhythm or routine in there. So we could help those children maybe think more about their routine. We could try and help them with understand their own rhythms themselves. But maybe in this case, the knock-on effect is we could maybe start to affect their parents and carers. Maybe they could start educating their parents saying, well, maybe you're snoring. Is that a problem? Have you got maybe sleep apnea? Or maybe with the parents saying, I need to get up this time. Can you help me get up out of bed this time? We shall see. Because sometimes we simplify things down. So you might have heard whether you're a lark or whether you're an owl. And already you might think, well, actually, yes, I definitely struggle in the morning. And therefore, if I reach my phone first thing in the morning, I'm going to really struggle with that. Should I give it more time? Or you might know that you're an owl. You know that you can stay up late working later and do more things as well. But it's maybe not as simple as that. That's a nice way of putting it, to be one type or the other. But we know our complex human beings. We're not maybe that simple, and maybe there's a whole range in between that we are. Okay. So, for example, what can we do? As I mentioned, how can we bridge these two together? So, for example, one example is here. It's therapy comics. It's called Sleep. And it's a really nice way of putting over some of those ideas for the children to understand and start to maybe look at their own routines, get some of those concepts across. In there as well is a lovely survey, a nice comic survey, which can help them think about, again, marking their day off. We've been trying different ways. We've been thinking about, well, how can we survey the children maybe randomly through the day? How sleepy do you feel? So maybe, again, as teachers, it's not our fault they're falling asleep in our lessons or looking drowsy. Maybe it is because of their bad rhythms and their bad sleep routines. You could maybe use serious play with Lego to try and get the children to explain about their rhythms, about their bedtime routines, if they have one. How can we use these different things? And back to technology, for example, with the Apple and iOS, it has a bedtime tool. Now, I tried this out. It said, if you want to get this much sleep, you need to go to bed at this time, which is great, but it's often like an alarm clock snoozing it. It always went off too early. I was going, well, I've still got this to do, or I still want to do that, and I ignored it. So I was not following my own advice. But maybe this type of technology could gamify that for children. Again, speaking to Bill Lord, head teacher today, he talked about how most of his children have now got Fitbits. He says, as we think, how can we gamify that, them monitoring their sleep? Will we get more children to sleep better? So what's prompted all this? Last summer, I went along to the Google Certified Innovator Camp, where you go with a problem, and I took my problem of how can we bridge getting from the research to the schools and the children. That was my problem. We pulled it apart, we put it together, we pulled it apart, put it together. And basically, that helped me then think about the process of this. Because what I don't want is, well, this is online safety. Schools going, okay, let's just do an assembly, let's do a set of lessons, and then we've covered it. You don't want sleep to be like that. It's more personal than that. Or what happens if you were to say, well, this is from one person looking to do this, or an organization looking to help you with sleep. That's not going to work. We need to think of a good approach forwards this. And maybe that's a collective. Maybe it's a people working together, sharing ideas, sharing what you're doing in your schools, in your settings. How can we maybe share ideas to find the best approach to help our children and our teachers and our parents and our carers and everybody get better sleep? So if you're interested in finding out more, or you're interested in sharing and working together, there's my email address there. Please do get in touch. And what we want to do is really focus on this. We've heard really clearly tonight from Neelam and from Dominic and from David, all about the different approaches people are using and how digital well-being is important. In there is sleep. If you've had a better night's sleep, you can cope with some of those issues better. If you've had a better night's sleep, you can think more clearly and more rationally about those things. Also, medically, if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're not or sleeping well, you will often be craving sugar. And therefore, again, that could link to diabetes and obesity. Sleep is so important to us all. And also sleep at the right time of the day. So thank you all very much. And please do get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much for listening to Digital Wellbeing Conversations. If you have any questions, we're happy to take it off stage as we've run over time. But again, thank you very much.